Salam, peace be upon you. My name is Muhammad Layaq Siddiqui, the father of Holophase. Part 33 Failure Mode Analysis. What counts as a real refutation? Remember the language we are learning. There is one field, phi, the holophase, one continuous cyclic movement from which all of reality unfolds. When phi begins to change, its first derivatives appear, and with them, the three dimensions show themselves at once. Time as omega, space as k, and motion as v, built from both. Every higher derivative is a finer question about how phi changes, and each one casts three shadows together: a time shadow, a space shadow, and the motion shadow. These echoes mix and weave into one another, forming the patterns we call fields, particles, bodies, thoughts, and worlds. In this picture, everything that exists is a living tapestry of phi, endlessly echoing through its derivatives and their dimensional shadows. Today, we listen to just one of those echoes. You are reaching the summit of Book 9.8, Validation and Testing, in Episode 9, The Generative Grammar. Our climb through this book has been an exercise in intellectual honesty. We learned to make specific predictions and to use computers as practice universes to test them. But now, we face the most difficult and most essential question of the entire scientific endeavor. What would it take for us to admit we are wrong? A theory that cannot fail is not a theory, it's a dogma. A map that cannot be incorrect is a fantasy. True courage in science lies not just in making predictions, but in predefining the conditions under which you will abandon your cherished ideas. Today, in Part 33, Failure Mode Analysis, What Counts as a Real Refutation, we perform this courageous act for the Holophase framework. We draw a line in the sand. We declare, in advance, what observations would constitute a fatal blow to the grammar as currently understood. Our anchor image is a master shipwright presenting a new vessel's design to the maritime board. He doesn't just show beautiful hull lines and promise speed. He presents a failure mode analysis. This ship, he says, is designed to withstand force 10 gales, but here are its limits. If the weld at joint A7 fails under stress X, the hull will buckle. If the ballast system cannot correct a list beyond 30 degrees, she will capsize. If the navigation system's error exceeds 0.5 nautical miles in these waters, she will run aground on the shoals. He points to specific, measurable breaking points. The board's job is not to hope these failures never happen, but to understand them, and to decide if the design is sound, given those known risks. Today, we are that shipwright, and the Holophase grammar is our vessel. We must identify its A7 welds, its critical list angles, its navigation error margins. We must say, if this is observed, the hull is broken. Here is the critical puzzle of this part. We have a complex, interconnected grammatical system. A single experiment might show a slight discrepancy from a prediction. Is that a refutation, or just an anomaly? How do we distinguish a fatal structural flaw from a minor adjustment? How do we prevent ourselves from endlessly patching the theory with ad hoc excuses every time data disagrees, thereby rendering it unfalsifiable? The answer requires a hierarchy of failure, a distinction between parameter misfits and structural failures. A parameter misfit is when a predicted number, like the mass of a particle, the speed of sound in a material, or a critical temperature, is off by a small amount, but the form of the prediction is correct. This is like a ship being slightly slower than designed. It suggests our measurement of the input parameters, like material constants, might be off, or that there are minor secondary effects we haven't included. It calls for refinement, not revolution. A structural failure is when the grammar itself produces a prediction that is categorically wrong or logically impossible within its own terms. This is the hull buckling. Structural failures attack the core grammatical rules. They show up in several devastating forms. Let us define the major structural failure modes of the Holophase grammar. Failure mode 1. Violation of a topological invariant. From Book 9.2. A core grammatical rule is that certain quantities, winding numbers, Chern numbers, are integers. They are topologically protected. The refutation. The observation of a stable static defect with a non-integer winding number in a controlled equilibrium system. For example, measuring the circulation around a persistent vortex in a superfluid and finding it equals 1.5 times h bar over mass instead of an integer multiple. This would mean the fundamental circle-valued nature of phi is broken, or that topological protection, a cornerstone of the grammar, simply fails. Not a refutation. A transient, unstable configuration that seems to have a fractional charge, which then quickly decays into integer charge defects. That's just dynamics, not a violation of the invariant. Failure mode 2. Persistent, inexplicable dispersion mismatch. From book 9.3, the dispersion relation omega of k is a fundamental fingerprint of a medium's grammar. The refutation. Measuring the dispersion relation for a pure, well-characterized medium, like a perfect crystal, with high precision, and finding it cannot be fit by any function derivable from a local, phi-based Lagrangian of reasonable complexity. If the data demands a dispersion curve that is fundamentally incompatible with the wave equations that emerge from a phi action, for example, it violates causality or has branches that cannot come from linearizing a second-order equation, then the very link between phi's dynamics and wave behavior is broken. Not a refutation. Needing to add a few more terms to the Lagrangian to capture finer details, like phonon scattering. That's just going to a higher derivative order. Failure mode 3. Breakdown of a conservation law in a closed system. From book 9.4. Symmetries in the action lead to conserved currents. Energy, momentum, charge. The refutation. In a meticulously isolated laboratory system, truly closed, measuring a clear, persistent, and significant non-conservation of one of these quantities. For example, the total electrical charge inside a sealed, shielded box changing over time without any particles entering or leaving. This would mean the action principle itself is fundamentally flawed, as it would be generating symmetries that are not reflected in nature. Not a refutation. Apparent non-conservation due to measurement error, or because the system wasn't truly closed, neutrinos escaping, gravitational waves carrying energy away. That's an experimental challenge, not a grammatical one. Failure mode 4. The impossibility of derivation. This is a meta-failure. The grand claim of Holophase is that all effective laws are derivable from the phi grammar via coarse graining and renormalization. The refutation. Discovering a clean, robust, macroscopic law of nature that, despite our best efforts, cannot be derived as an effective theory from any plausible starting phi model. Not just it's hard, but a proof of impossibility. If a law like the second law of thermodynamics, the increase of entropy, or the Pauli exclusion principle could be shown to require entirely new, primitive axioms completely unrelated to the dynamics and topology of a single field, then phi is not universal. Not a refutation. The derivation being technically difficult or not yet completed. That's just unfinished work. Failure mode 5. Logical inconsistency between sectors. The grammar must be self-consistent. Predictions from the topological sector must agree with those from the wave sector when applied to the same phenomenon. The refutation. A direct contradiction. For example, the topological analysis of a system predicts it can support braiding statistics of type A, but the detailed quantum dynamical simulation, based on the same phi action, of the same system shows it can only produce statistics of type B, and the discrepancy is irreducible. This would mean the grammar is generating contradictory stories about itself, a fatal internal flaw. Not a refutation. An apparent contradiction that is resolved by realizing we were applying the topological analysis to the wrong effective field. That's an error in application, not in the core grammar. So here's the point. We must have the courage to pre-commit. We must say, if you show me a stable half-vortex, the theory is broken. If you show me a fundamental dispersion curve that no phi Lagrangian can produce, the theory is broken. If you find a truly closed system where charge isn't conserved, the theory is broken. These are not negotiable. They are the hull welds. If they fail, the ship sinks. Let's explore the triunity of failure analysis. The time echo of failure, the unmistakable signal. A true structural failure is not a fluke. It must be repeatable and persistent over time. The time echo is durable contradiction. It's not one anomalous data point that vanishes. It's a signal that refuses to go away, replicated across labs and epochs, standing as a permanent monument to the theory's inadequacy. Time, instead of washing away the anomaly, engraves it deeper. The space echo of failure, the localized break. A structural failure often manifests in a specific, well-defined location in parameter space or physical space. The space echo is pinpointed rupture. It's not a general fuzziness, it's a sharp crack. The fractional vortex sits there. The rogue dispersion branch exists for this precise wave vector. The conservation law breaks for that specific interaction. The failure has an address. The motion echo of failure, the blocked path. A structural failure blocks further progress. It's not a bump in the road you can drive around, it's a collapsed bridge. The motion echo is forced halt. When faced with such a failure, you cannot simply tweak parameters and continue. Your conceptual motion, the forward progress of your understanding, stops dead. You must turn back and find a new path entirely, or rebuild the bridge from new principles. Now, let's locate this ultimate commitment on the master tree. This is the crowning node of Book 9.8, Validation and Testing. The failure mode analysis node depends on the entire structure of the grammar below it, for you cannot know how something can break unless you know how it is built. It enables the final, honest synthesis of Book 9.9. We can only synthesize physics into phi if we know the limits of that synthesis, the points where the synthesis might shatter. This node is the immune system of the theory. It defines the pathogens that would kill it, ensuring it remains alive only if it is truly robust. To understand this in practice, let's light lanterns from domains where failure modes are clearly defined. A near lantern from software engineering, the bug report with a fatal error log. A program has a specification. A fatal error is a failure mode that violates the core logic. For example, a database program has the rule: every customer record must have a unique ID. A failure mode is two records created with the same ID. When this happens, the program crashes or corrupts data. It's not a performance issue, a parameter misfit. It's a logical contradiction. The engineers have predefined this as a show-stopping bug. They don't say, well, maybe IDs aren't that unique. They fix the logic. A middle lantern from medicine. A diagnostic test that rules out a disease. A patient has symptoms that could be disease A or disease B. A specific blood test for disease A is highly accurate. The failure mode for the disease A hypothesis is test comes back negative with high confidence. The doctor doesn't then say, well, the test might be wrong, let's assume it's disease A anyway. They accept the refutation and move to test for disease B. The negative test is a predefined condition for abandoning that hypothesis. A far lantern from cosmology, the steady-state universe versus the Big Bang. In the mid-20th century, the steady-state theory proposed a universe with no beginning, constant density, and continuous creation of matter. It made a clear prediction. The universe should look roughly the same at all distances, and thus all look-back times. The discovery of the cosmic microwave background, CMB, and its black-body spectrum was a fatal blow. But an even sharper failure mode was the prediction of source counts of radio galaxies. Steady state predicted a specific distribution. Deeper surveys showed a clear excess of distant, younger radio sources, contradicting the prediction. This wasn't a slight misfit, it was a structural failure of the no evolution core tenet. Proponents tried to adjust parameters, but the paradigm was ultimately abandoned because it could not account for the CMB and the evolving source counts without becoming contrived. The failure modes were clear and decisive. From crashing software to definitive medical tests to cosmic evolution, a unifying principle. A mature field defines what it means to fail. It does not protect its core ideas by making them infinitely flexible. It puts them in harm's way, with clear criteria for what constitutes a mortal wound. What then is the specific language role of a failure mode? It is the grammatical rule of negation. It is the meta rule that says, if a sentence of the form observation O is verified to be true, then the entire current grammatical framework G is declared false or severely incomplete. It is the syntax for scientific humility. It answers the question, what would it take for this language to be declared an inadequate description of reality? The core question this part asks about phi is, what are the specific, observable conditions that are logically incompatible with the Holophase grammar in its current form, and how do we distinguish these structural refutations from mere quantitative discrepancies? We are moving from asking how the grammar works to defining how it can break. What does this failure analysis do? It prevents the theory from becoming a just-so story that can explain anything and therefore nothing. It focuses research on high-risk, high-reward experiments, those that probe the failure modes. It builds credibility by demonstrating confidence and honesty. It accelerates progress by forcing decisive conclusions, not endless debate. Now, stability and change. A clear set of failure modes is a sign of a strong, mature research program. It holds as long as the community upholds the integrity of the pre-commitment. It breaks down in the face of adokery, the constant addition of epicycles or new fields to explain away failures without predictive gain. It also faces the challenge of scale and approximation. Sometimes a failure is not in the fundamental grammar, but in our approximate effective theory. Distinguishing these requires deep investigation. This brings us to the final, operational step, designing for failure. The central claim. The Holophase research program must maintain a living, public document listing its core structural failure modes, like the ones listed above. Researchers should actively design experiments and simulations targeted at probing these precise failure conditions. The health of the program will be judged by its engagement with these potential refutations, not by its avoidance of them. A concrete, high-stakes measurement scene. Hunting for fractional vortex circulation in an ultra-cold superfluid. We create an almost ideal clean phi system, a Bose-Einstein condensate, BEC, of rubidium atoms, a coherent quantum fluid described by a complex order parameter, a perfect stand-in for a simple phi field. We use lasers to stir the condensate and nucleate vortices, topological defects. We then use high-resolution imaging to measure the phase winding around each vortex. This is done by interfering the BEC with itself, creating interference fringes. A vortex shows up as a fork in the fringes. The number of extra lines gives the winding number. The pass condition, grammar holds. Every stable, isolated vortex observed shows a winding number of +1, -1, or other small integers. The data shows a clear, unequivocal jump. Vortices have integer charge. This confirms the topological production grammar. The fail condition, structural refutation. We observe a stable, long-lived vortex configuration where the interference pattern indicates a phase winding of, for example, 1/2 or 1/3. After exhaustive checks to rule out imaging artifacts, transient states, or multiple overlapping vortices, the fractional winding persists. This would be a direct hit on failure mode 1. It would mean that in this cleanest of systems, the topological protection of the circle-valued field fails. The holophase grammar, which roots particle-like properties in such topological invariants, would be fundamentally flawed for this domain. The honest response would be to declare, the current holophase model for BECs is falsified. We need a new principle to explain stable fractional defects. This might lead to a revolutionary new understanding, perhaps involving different topological spaces, like a field on a sphere instead of a circle, or new types of long-range entanglement. This is what real science looks like. It is not a celebration of confirmation. It is a vigilant search for the cracks in the facade, with a pre-planned response for when we find them. Let's cultivate a practical recognition skill. You can train your mind to recognize robust failure mode thinking in any argument or model. Look for the kill switch. Evaluate a business strategy. A good strategy acknowledges risks. Our plan assumes market growth of 5%. If growth is flat or negative for 4 consecutive quarters, our expansion model is invalid, and we will pivot to plan B. That's a defined failure mode. Listen to a political policy proposal. A serious proposal should say, this policy aims to reduce traffic congestion by 20%. We will measure average commute times in the corridor. If after 2 years there is no statistically significant reduction, the policy will be considered a failure and repealed. This defines success and failure clearly. Consider a personal goal. I will exercise 3 times a week to lower my blood pressure. If after 6 months of consistent effort, my blood pressure has not dropped, I will consult a doctor to investigate other causes. You have a metric and a condition for admitting the current approach isn't working. Whenever you see a clear if X, then this idea is wrong statement, you are seeing intellectual honesty. You are seeing a failure mode analysis. We must connect this final piece of validation directly to our entire holophase journey. In the previous parts, we built tools for testing. Here, we define what constitutes test failure. This completes the loop of honesty. It ensures that our grand synthesis in book 9.9 is not an arrogant declaration of truth, but a humble presentation of a map whose known fault lines are clearly marked. We haven't built an unchallengeable fortress. We have drawn a map and said, here be dragons, and if you find them, the map is wrong. If you want to see the full mathematical derivations and exact equations behind this idea, the formal criteria for topological stability, the rigorous definitions of symmetry and conservation, the proofs of no-go theorems that define failure modes, you can search for Holophase on Zenodo. There you will find the scientific papers that this audio journey is built on. Let us pause here at the completion of Book 9.8. We have equipped ourselves with the full toolkit of validation, predictions, simulations, and now a clear-eyed definition of failure. We are ready to assess the grammar with open eyes and a courageous heart. Our journey in Episode 9 has one final glorious task. We have learned the generative grammar in detail, and we have sworn to test it honestly. Now, we must see if it works. Does this single, beautiful language actually speak the dialects of the known world? In the final book, Book 9.9, Synthesis of Physics, we will witness the moment of truth. We will see classical mechanics, electromagnetism, quantum theory, and general relativity emerge not as separate principles, but as natural, compelling chapters written in the one language of phi. Before we end, the mandatory zoom out to hold our scope. Failure modes are not external to the grammar. They are the logical negations of its core production rules. A fractional vortex negates the integer winding rule. A rogue dispersion curve negates the derivability from a local action. These are not attacks from outside. They are contradictions revealed from within the framework's own logical structure. One field, phi, plus its infinite derivatives, plus the courage to define its own limits. From this commitment to falsifiability, the Holophase grammar earns the right to be taken seriously as a candidate for a theory of everything. As we conclude, hold the image of the shipwright and his blueprint with the failure points marked. The Holophase grammar is that blueprint. The fractional vortex experiment, the precision dispersion measurement, the closed system conservation test, these are the stress tests on the hull welds. We are not just the shipwrights, we are also the crew who will sail her into the unknown waters of experiment. And we have promised in advance to heed the sound of cracking metal. For only a ship that can break but doesn't is truly seaworthy. Only a theory that can fail but hasn't truly holds water. Salam and peace be upon you.